Hi everyone, it's Thursday night tip night, and tonight I'm going to talk to you about how to make a D sleeve. It's a hanging sleeve for your quilt, and the shape of it looks like a D. And there's the end of it. I hope you can see. If you hold it this way, I guess it would be a D shape. And what that does is it keeps your quilt from bulging when it's hanging on a wall or hanging at a quilt show. It gives some extra room for that pole to be in there. So this is my quilt that I've had hanging on my wall for a while. And when you make your D sleeve, you want to make it so you use pretty fabric. And this is how mine turned out. That's what it looks like. I hope you can see it. And when it hangs with the rod through there, and then it doesn't bulge on the front of your quilt. The bulge of the pole is on the back. So I made this one, and I have some videos of me making it. You want to sew it so your pretty fabric is on the outside. So you sew it not like you normally do. You sew it with wrong sides together. And I'll just give you general instructions right now. I cut my fabric 9 inches wide because I want a 4-inch hanging sleeve. That's what most quilt shows require. And then I use a 1/2-inch seam allowance. That's why I use a 9-inch piece of fabric. I measure my quilt however long I want it, and I know I'm going to fold the ends of the sleeve in to finish the raw edges. So I add about 1 inch on each side to make that hem. So I hemmed the edge of this. Then you take your piece of fabric and you fold it in half, the whole length, and give it a really crisp press. Then the next thing you do is take each side and fold the raw edge right against that middle crease. So you fold both sides into that middle crease and crease that really, really well. Then you sew a 1/2-inch seam. I pin it, and then I sew a 1/2-inch seam all the length with right sides on the outsides, wrong sides together. And then what you end up is you have 3 creases. You have your 2 that you folded in, and this is your middle crease. So these 2 that you folded in, they go against your quilt. So when you put this on, you figure out how far down you want it from the top of your quilt. And then this is what it should look like. And you want to sew this end shut. You want to sew that against your quilt, because when they're putting a pole in there, it could slip behind the hanging sleeve instead of in the hanging sleeve. And then just stitch all along the top of your quilt, that hanging sleeve. Make sure it's nice and even. And then across the bottom, and then you have this bulk like this where it bulks up and the pole can go right in there. And I hope that will help you with your hanging sleeves. I've had some questions about the hanging sleeve at the quilt show. I cut my fabric 9 inches wide to make my 4-inch hanging sleeve because I'm going to have a 1/2-inch seam allowance. Next, you fold your fabric in half with wrong sides together. I guess I should have used printed fabric, but you want the pretty side on the outside. So wrong sides together, and give it a really good press to make a sharp crease there. So your fabric isn't folded in half. Right here, see, it's folded in half. There's the fold up there. Next, you're going to want to hem the ends of your sleeve. So what I did is I just fold over about a 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch, and give it another roll. And then you're going to stitch along here, and that'll seal in those raw edges. So this is after I stitched that little hem, and I did it on both ends of the hanging sleeve. Like I said, this is 9 inches across this way because I'm making a 1/2 inch seam. And I have it folded in half. Here's the middle line where I have it folded in half. The next step is to fold each half into that center crease. So there's my center crease. I'm going to fold each half into there, and I'm going to press across here and make another crease. And I do that on this side, and then I fold this half in right to the center line and press along here. This is what my piece of fabric looks like now. It has the center crease, and then it has a crease this way and a crease this way that just come and meet right on that center line, like that. And next what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin these 2 raw edges together. I'm going to pin these together right along here. I'm going to make a 1/2 inch seam the whole length of my sleeve. So you can see here I have it pinned the length of my sleeve, and I will do the fabric. I'm using white fabric, but the fabric is the pretty side is facing you here. You have wrong sides together, and this is the length, and there's the other hemmed edge, and I will make a 1/2 inch seam allowance here. Sewing a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I have the right side of the fabric on the outside. I have my 1/2 inch seam allowance sewed, and next I am either going to press this seam allowance all one direction, or if you want to relieve some of the bulk, you can press it open. I usually press mine open. I usually press them open. And you want to make sure that you keep your crease that you have at the top here. You have a crease there. Keep that crease and keep this crease at the bottom. If you kind of iron over it, you'll need to make that crease again because that gives you your D shape. But I'll show you after I have this pressed. My seam allowance pressed open, and then that's what makes the D shape. If you look here, you can see that this gets put down, sewed onto your quilt, and I sew along here against your quilt, and then I sew along the top of my quilt, this part first, and then I sew along this part, and that makes the D shape. And the rod will stick up this way, and it doesn't bulge the front of your quilt.